Here's the thing, you guys. Here's the thing. Welcome back, Fight Feeders. In today's video, we're going to break down the UFC Fight Night that is happening on February 21st, 2026 in Houston, Texas. We've got the return of, here's the thing, you guys, Sean Strickland, America's favorite jab and teeper. Sorry, I had to say it. But you know what? Sean Strickland is one of my favorite fighters because he just says what the hell he wants. Even though it's not always stuff that I personally agree with, I think that he is hilarious. I think that people underrate his ability on the feet. But then we've also got his adversary in the main event. That is Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who is one of the most exciting middleweights that we've seen. Last outing, he fucking grabs Roman Dolidze like it's his younger brother, and he fucking drags him across the octagon with a rear naked choke. Something I haven't seen in the octagon to this date. He legit grabbed bro and ran with him. As it's kind of how you would do your little brother if you have one. I only know that because I am a younger brother. So I don't know what it's like to run with the person. I just know what it's like to be Roman. So shout out to Roman Dolidze. But in the co-main event, we've got an amazing fight between Geoff Hands of Steel Neal versus Uros the Medic, which is also going to be a striker's delight. Probably not likely to go the distance there, but a lot of fun fights happening in Houston, Texas. We're going to break down the entire card from start to finish. So make sure you guys grab your popcorn, grab a refreshment, get your posture up, as Tim Welch would say, and let's dive in to this card. And if you guys could do me a big favor, give the video a like, comment below who you have in the main event. I want to hear from you guys. So make sure to comment below who you got in the main event, or even comment one of the fights that is the most exciting to you if it's not the main event. And please subscribe to Fite Feed. Let's go ahead and dive in. All right, guys, the first fight on the card is in the 125-pound division, the women's flyweight division. We've got CARLI, JUDICE, and Julianna Miller. Now, shout out to Julianna Miller. I actually picked her to beat Ivana Petrovic. My boy Kevin Tran, you'll remember this because that is how you and I started going back and forth, and I love seeing Kevin Tran in the comments. Kevin was giving me shit back in May when I said Julianna Miller gets it done. He's like, wow, man, picking Julianna Miller, that's crazy. Going with Miller's a crazy take, but it fucking worked. So I can't do it in this one, guys. Even though she's a 96 baby, she's got to represent for us, born in 96. But looking at this fight, guys, CARLI JUDICE, she is 26 years old, 5'7", 68-inch reach. She's 5-2 as a pro, 2-1 in the UFC. 5 wins by KO, a 100% KO rate. 2 losses by decision. Both of them split decision losses, so you could go either way there. But her last 4 fights, guys, a huge KO in round 1 over Vinisi Dubin, however you say it. Which, if you remember, Eunice Dubin knocked out the Kayla Harrison carbon copy on Contender Series, starched her out cold, won the contract. She tried to do that same game, but CARLI JUDICE head kicked her into the ether, dropped her, knocked her out badly. Then JUDICE just pieced up Nicole Cagliari and gets a big KO in round 3 in her last showing. So she's 2-2 in her last 4. Julianna Miller is 29, as I mentioned, 96 baby, represent, 5'7", 66-inch reach. She's 4-3 as a pro, 2-2 in the UFC. She's got 1 win by KO, 25% of her wins, 2 wins by submission, 50% of her wins, 1 win by decision, the remaining 25% of her wins, giving Julianna Miller a 75% finishing rate overall. Julianna Miller's lost once by way of KO, a 33% KO loss rate, and then 2 times by way of decision, 67% of her losses. 2-2 in her last 4 as well. But a little bit of a different look here, right? She got a big win over Brogan Walker, KO in round 3. She just kind of overwhelmed her. And Julianna Miller's got that scrappy style, dude. She's got a very weird ability to grapple and make the grappling very scrappy, right? It doesn't look like this clean grappling style. It's more of like she's got this long body for that weight class and just finds those weird opportunities to get a trip and a takedown and then, kind of land some damage and things from the top there, and then maybe even latch up submissions. But in her last fight, dude, she did win, but it was not a super sexy win, if you will. She had a great job and did a great job at winning those grappling exchanges and forcing those awkward grappling exchanges with Ivana Petrovic. But guys, I think CARLI JUDICE is she has that Louisiana hot sauce style. She is going to land with some mustard. And I see her landing, I love that she throws the body kick. She really goes strong to the body. I see CARLI JUDICE landing some big body shots on Julianna, maybe getting her to drop her hands and then landing a big head kick. I see CARLI JUDICE finishing her by way of KO in round 2 I'm not sure if it'll be a head kick, but I see her landing a big shot that drops her, and then she'll land some ground and pound. But I think CARLI JUDICE is the better fighter here, and I see her getting it done in round 2 by way of KO. Kevin Tran, you'll have to let me know if you're going with Julianna this time. I'm curious. So let me know, brother. All right, guys. Fight number 2 on the card is a featherweight bout. And we've got YADIER del Valle versus Jordan Leavitt. Jordan Leavitt, if you guys don't know, he's dropping down from lightweight. This is the dude likes to hit the splits after he fucks his opponent up or chokes him out. YADIER is 29 years old, 5'9" with a 69-inch reach. He's 10-0 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC, 2 wins by way of knockout, a 20% KO rate, 4 wins by submission, a 40% submission rate, 4 wins by decision, a 40% decision rate, giving Mr. Del Valle a 60% finishing rate overall. 0 losses. He's an undefeated fighter. He's on a 10-fight winning streak, guys. Very solid. Big wins over Connor Matthews and Isaac Dogarian, both subbed in the first round. Isaac Dogarian, I think, got released after that one. Remember, Isaac's like, I'm going to hurt this dude, and then he fucking tapped out. Now, Jordan Leavitt is dropping down, so it's going to be a bit of an interesting fight here. Because you got a guy in Jordan Leavitt who's a very solid fighter, fights out of Syndicate MMA, very good training partners. He's from Vegas. He's very close to a lot of those guys. He's shown some good talent, guys. Like he's gone in there against some good guys that are outside the rankings at lightweight. But he has he's not going to be much smaller here. He's 5'9", 71-inch reach, 12-3 as a pro, 5-3 in the UFC. He has 2 wins by KO, a 17% KO rate, 7 wins by submission, a 58% submission rate, 3 wins by way of decision, a 25% decision rate, giving Jordan Leavitt a 75% finishing rate, and that's at a higher weight class as well. Now, his only losses, though, came by way of submission. That's 2 losses, and that's 67% of his losses, and then 1 loss by decision is 33% of his losses. I'm sorry if I said he's only lost by submission. He has most of his losses by submission. Now, his last 4, he had he's 2-2. He had a solid scrap with Paddy Pimblett, but Paddy Pimblett's able to get the job done, and then he does the little Modern Warfare teabag afterwards. But then he goes out there, gets a KO win over Victor Martinez in round 1. Then he gets subbed by Chase Hooper in round 1, and then he gets a sub over Kurt Hollabaugh in round 1. So Jordan Leavitt has kind of been all over the place, but he's fought guys who have a lot of experience. And I think in this matchup, it's going to be interesting because YADIER seems to have reaped benefits from being a bit of that taller, lankier, maybe stronger guy at the 145-pound weight class. This matchup's a fun one because Jordan Leavitt is not a great striker, but he's a southpaw and he's a very awkward style. Then he finds a very good way of, latching up like single leg takedowns, getting to the body lock. He got that slam KO over Matt Hamill, I think it was. And he was like crying but laughing afterwards. It was really weird. He was like doing like a pouty face, like a mime. Like, anyways, that's what I remember. Fucking creeped me out. But he's cool, dude. Jordan Leavitt, he walked out to the Shrek song. Hey now, some Smash Mouth. But guys, this fight is an interesting one because you do have that ability. Jordan Leavitt, coming from the higher weight class, is probably used to going toe-to-toe with guys that are probably much stronger in the grappling. So this could be a bit of a grappler's delight, but I think YADIER, the reason I think that he'll win this fight is I think he's scrappy enough in the grappling ability, the submission ability, but he's also going to have, I think, a lot better striking at range. And so I think in this matchup, that is what's going to win him the fight. I could see them being very scrappy, maybe nullifying one another in the grappling, right? Maybe Leavitt's able to get YADIER in some weird spots. YADIER is able to get him in some weird spots, but they kind of scramble out of it. But where I see this fight ending up is YADIER gets those points with the striking on the feet. He could end up getting Jordan Leavitt in a weird scramble and then choking him out, because I think that's what happened with Jordan Leavitt in some of these matchups, like against Chase Hooper. Chase Hooper got him into a weird scramble and was able to find that submission. And that is also very likely for YADIER in this fight. But, you could see Jordan Leavitt be crafty, bring that extra weight in, and maybe he is able to bully YADIER, but I just don't see it happening. I see it being a fun scrap, but I think YADIER stays undefeated, gets another win here, goes to 11-0. But I think he gets it done by way of decision this time versus it being a finish. All right, guys, fight number 3. Welterweight division. We're welcoming one of the Dana White's Contender Series alums from last season, Jean-Paul LEBOSNOYANI versus Phil Rowe. LEBOSNOYANI, 27 years old, 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. He's 9-2 as a pro. 0-0 in the UFC. This is his debut. 3 wins by knockout. It's 33% of his wins. 5 wins by way of submission. That's 56% of his wins. 1 win by decision. That is the other and remaining 11% of his wins, giving Jean-Paul, JPL as I'll call him, an 89% finishing rate overall. Now, JPL has also had some losses. His only losses have come by way of knockout. So he's got 2 losses, both in that category, meaning he's got 100% of his losses by way of knockout. He is on a bit of a streak here. Last 4, 4-0, and he's done very well, right? He's got a kind of a mix of finishes here. 2 KOs in the first round, 1 submission in the first round, and then 1 decision. His opponent's Phil Rowe, who's a bit of an aging guy here. They're not too aging, though. He's 35. He's still spry. 35, 6'3", and 80.5-inch reach. He's 11-5 as a pro, 4-3 in the UFC. 7 wins by knockout, a 64% KO rate. 4 wins by submission, a 36% submission rate, giving Mr. Phil Rowe a 100% finishing rate overall. And in his career, he's lost once by way of KO, 20% of his losses. The other 4 losses came by way of decision, which is the remaining 80% of his losses. Now, his last 4, not as good, right? He's 1-3. He had a split decision loss to Neil Magny. It could have probably gone the other way as well. Did lose to Jake Matthews by unanimous decision. Against Ange Lusa, has a back-and-forth scrap where I think they both landed some big shots and dropped each other. But Phil Rowe sticks it out, gets the big KO in round 3, wins himself a bonus, I believe. And then against his last opponent, Korean Tyson, which I think we should just take the Korean Tyson name from Seok Hyun Ko because the guy just fucking wet blankets people. He did it against Oban Elliott and he did it against Phil Rowe. But Phil Rowe had no success in that last fight, guys. It was frustrating to watch as a fan. What I worry about is that JPL has a solid striking background, but he has some really good ground game as well, right? 5 wins by submission. He has been close to the Matt Serra, Ray Longo camp, I believe. And so I see JPL, guys, although younger, and also he's going to have a bit of a struggle with that reach disadvantage. But Phil Rowe, as I think people have mentioned in the past, does not have the best ability to utilize that very long reach. I see JPL being able to cut off the cage, mix in those weird strikes he has, right? He had a huge KO on Contender Series. I think he landed a big head kick, and then he ran him down. He sprinted this guy down and knocked his ass out. He literally ran and punched, did a running punch and dropped his ass. I see him, and another thing with Phil Rowe, I think Phil Rowe probably suffers a bit with the cut down to 170 because we did see a guy like Lusa drop him. To me, that's not a good sign because JPL has shown to be a bit of a powerhouse. Although he's a shorter stature here, he's a bit of a powerhouse. He's a younger guy, and I just think he has a lot more ability on the feet and also mixing in the ground game. I just see JPL kind of weathering any of that reach storm that comes from Phil Rowe, which will probably last a very short period of time, be able to get inside the pocket, land some big shots, maybe hurt Phil Rowe, latch up a sub. I see it going where there's a solid maybe back and forth first round, but round 2, I see JPL landing something big and getting a big KO over Phil Rowe. Could be wrong, though. Phil Rowe could be a big underdog and maybe a live underdog because of the fact he does have an ability to land big shots and put his opponents out. I just wouldn't bank on that in this. I think JPL is the more likely to win this fight, and I see him getting a finish, given that he has an 89% finishing rate. So I'm going JPL, KO, round 2. All right, guys, fight number 4. It's back in the welterweight division, 170 pounds. RAMIZ BRAHIMAJ versus PUNAHELE SORIANO. RAMIZ is 33 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. He's 13-5 as a pro, 5-3 in the UFC. 1 win by way of KO, an 8% KO rate. 12 wins by way of submission, a 92% submission rate, giving RAMIZ a 100% finish rate, which you fucking love to see. Now, although his last name is BRAHIMAJ, he's named after the Brahim, or Brahims are named after him, I guess, in Fallout. That's what I think of when I see his name. He has 5 losses. One of those losses was a KO loss. The rest of his losses are by decision. So it's 20% by KO, 80% by decision. He is on a nice little streak himself. He lost to Themba Gorimbo, which was not a good look when you really break it down. But outside of that, he goes out after that and he gets pretty quick finishes over several opponents. A round 1 KO over Mickey Gall. Then he gets a big round 1 submission over Billy Ray Goff. A lot of people were picking Billy Ray Goff to get it done there. I thought RAMIZ had more avenues to win, and what do you know? He gets it done. And then you got Austin Vanderford, where Vanderford, I think, had a good first round, but then RAMIZ catches him, gets him in that submission, and chokes his ass out in round 2. His opponent is PUNAHELE SORIANO, a Hawaiian with some fucking power. 33 years old, 5'11", 72.5-inch reach. He's 12-4 as a pro, 6-4 in the UFC. He's got 7 wins by KO, a 58% KO rate. 2 wins by submission, a 17% submission rate. 3 wins by decision, a 25% decision rate. given Mr. Soriano a 75% finishing rate overall. 1 loss by way of KO, 25% of his losses. 1 loss by submission, 25% of his losses. And then the other 50% of his losses are by way of decision. He has 2 losses by way of decision. So his last 4, UFC doing a great job here, matching up 2 guys who are 3-1 in their last 4. And really a lot more success for Punahele at the welterweight weight limit, right? He came from middleweight. I think realized that he's probably a bit undersized for that middleweight division in this modern era. And he's seen some success. He got a big KO in round 1 over Uros Medic, a big win over Nikola Veretenikov. So this one, guys, actually, I think this one's actually a bit of a harder fight to break down, because I think that there's absolutely an opportunity for Punahele, given that he's bringing that middleweight frame he used to carry. He's going to have power in the hands. He's got that Samoan and Hawaiian background. He could land a big shot that knocks RAMIZ the fuck out. But where I have to go with RAMIZ in this fight, guys, is RAMIZ has been really picking up in his striking. He's shown much better levels to the striking in his recent outings. And we know that when it gets to the floor, he is always going to be a very high and heavy submission threat. And given that Soriano, half of his losses, or one of his losses, 25% of his losses came by way of submission, there is that potential for RAMIZ to catch him in something, whether it be the guillotine that he likes or another type of submission. And that's the thing, RAMIZ gets these submissions standing up too. He gets standing guillotines on guys. So there is that potential that I just think RAMIZ, guys, because of his ability to probably stand on the feet with him and then also mix in those awkward and weird submission attempts, I see RAMIZ getting Punahele in something like that and subbing him by way of whatever submission he wants by round 2. I think that you have every right to think that Punahele goes out there and maybe even lands a big KO shot and wins by way of knockout. That is very likely to happen as well. I just think in recent outings, we've seen RAMIZ show off an uncanny ability to, even if he's behind in the fight somehow, latch up a submission and get the win by way of sub. And that was what I think will happen in this matchup, guys. Fight number 5, we've got a women's bantamweight bout, 135 pounds, between NORA, CORNOLLE, and JOSELYNE Edwards. CORNOLLE is 36 years old, 5'7" with a 67-inch reach. She's 9-3 as a pro, 3-2 in the UFC. She's got 6 wins by KO, a 67% KO rate, 2 wins by submission, a 22% submission rate, 1 win by way of decision, an 11% decision rate, giving her an 89% finishing rate overall, which is very, very good for the women's division. Her only loss, and my apologies, guys, I punched this in wrong. CORNOLLE has 3 losses, as I mentioned. She has only lost by way of decision. She's got 3 decision losses in her career. I accidentally put her 1 decision win in the loss category. Should have been 3, regardless. Her opponent is JOSELYNE Edwards, who's 30 years old, 5'8", a 70-inch reach, 16-6, a 7-4 record in the UFC. Edwards has 7 wins by KO, a 44% KO rate, 4 wins by submission, a 25% submission rate, 5 wins by decision, a 31% decision rate, giving Edwards a 69% finishing rate overall. She has 1 loss by way of submission, which is 17% of her losses. The other 5 losses in her career came by way of decision, and that's 83% of her losses. And guys, JOSELYNE Edwards, I think, has really hit a stride here in her career. She's on a 3-fight win streak. She's 3-1 in her last 4. Gets a big submission win against Tamirez Vidal. Goes on to then get back-to-back KOs in round 1 against Chelsea Chandler. If you don't know Chelsea Chandler, she did the Get Out Challenge when she fought Norma Dumont. And they gave us a nice little fun clip prior to the fight, too. And then you have Priscilla Cachoeira, Zombie Girl. Zombie Girl goes and knocks out Josiane Nunes. She thinks she could play that same game with JOSELYNE Edwards, and JOSELYNE Edwards sits her ass down and KOs her, starts her out cold in the apex. So JOSELYNE Edwards, guys, has really just shown off a very strong striking acumen, some power in her hands. She's got, dude, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but like when she's out there, she has tree trunks for thighs, and not in a bad way. Like, she's muscular. And I just think that she is, I think she had a little bit of a weight issue in their last one, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember 100%. But I think JOSELYNE Edwards, guys, gets this one done by decision off of sheer physicality and just volume on the feet. I think she'll be able to piece Nora CORNOLLE up. And there is a chance that Nora CORNOLLE, she's got good striking herself, could potentially get JOSELYNE Edwards on the back foot and maybe make her a bit more tentative. But I see JOSELYNE Edwards, if she is bringing that same heat that she's brought her last 3 fights, I see her being on the front foot, being the aggressor, landing big shots on NORA CORNOLLE, especially those leg kicks. And I see her just winning this fight by way of, landing more significant strikes over the course of 3 rounds, getting a decision. And I think it's going to be a unanimous decision for JOSELYNE Edwards. All right, guys, fight number 6. We've got ALDEN CORIA versus Louis GURULE. This is like a welterweight, flyweight showcase, guys. Lots of flyweight fights, lots of welterweights. ALDEN CORIA's 27 years old, 5'8" with a 67-inch reach. 11-3 as a pro, 1-0 in the UFC. He's got a 5 wins by way of KO, a 45% KO rate. 4 wins by way of sub, a 36% submission rate. 2 wins by way of decision, 18% decision rate. Giving Mr. Coria an 82% finishing rate overall. That is a fucking beautiful finishing rate for flyweight. He has 1 loss by submission, which is 33% of his losses, and then 2 losses by decision, which is the other 67% of his losses. He's had a solid run here, guys. Really, if you want to break it down, I would say he's on a 4-fight or more winning streak. The no contest that's showing is red. Not sure why it is showing is red. He actually was a plus 600 underdog against Paris Moran on the regional scene. And the UFC was actually there watching this fight. I think they were there for looking for a fight or something. He ends up catching Paris Moran, dropping him, and then landing big ground and pound. Gets him in back mount and just fucking ground and pounds his face from back mount. Like, Paris Moran's face at the canvas, he's landing big hooks to the side of the cheeks of Paris Moran. He's out cold, wins the belt on the regional scene. Now, this gets turned to a no contest. Now, some idiots will say it was a performance-enhancing substance, but it wasn't. He just got popped for a little bit of marijuana in his system. Not really something that I agree with, but it is the Texas Commission, so he's got to make sure he's on his P's and Q's and not smoking the Mary Jane for this one, because they're back in Texas. But then he comes out, gets a big win versus this German Orpineda Ponce by KO. Then he comes into the UFC and he hurts Alessandro Costa a couple times, ends up getting the big KO in round 3. Now, his opponent is Louis GURULE. They both actually fought on the last card together. It was the UFC Noche card in San Antonio. Louis GURULE is 32, 5'5", 64-inch reach. He's 10-2 as a pro, 0-2 in the UFC. 5 wins by knockout, a 50% KO rate. 1 win by submission, a 10% submission rate. 4 wins by decision, a 40% decision rate, giving Louis GURULE a 60% finishing rate overall. Looking at his losses, GURULE's lost once by way of KO and then lost once by way of decision. His only 2 losses are in the UFC, and he is 2-2 in his last 4. As I mentioned, he gets KO'd by Osbourne, who's also fighting on this card. He then loses to Jesus Aguilar by way of decision. And guys, this fight, I think Louis GURULE is a good fighter. He does have that potential to mix in the grappling, land some big shots on the feet. But ALDEN CORIA, guys, fights out of that 4-ounce fight club. One of the main training partners is Joshua Van. I see ALDEN CORIA going out there, guys. I just see him beating the fucking brakes off Louis GURULE. I'm just going to keep it 100. I think that he will beat the brakes off Louis GURULE, and I think he gets a KO. If it's not in round 1, I think he gets a KO in round 2. GURULE has shown a little bit of grit, been able to kind of bounce back when he gets hurt a little bit. I see CORIA just catching him in round 2 and putting him away. And I got him by winning the fight by way of KO. All right, guys. Fight number 7 is a flyweight bout, 125 pounds. We got Osbourne, who's 34 years old, 5'7", a 73-inch reach. He is 13-9 as a pro, 5-7 in the UFC. He's got 5 wins by way of knockout, a 38% KO rate. 5 wins by submission, a 38% submission rate. 3 wins by way of decision, a 23% decision rate, giving Osbourne a 77% finishing rate overall. Ode's got 2 losses by KO, 22% of his losses. 4 losses by way of submission, a 44% submission loss rate. 3 losses by decision, a 33% decision loss rate. Now, Chidi's last 4 fights, guys. It looks a lot of red here, right? But there's some things we got to call out, right? So he did lose to Rafael Filho. That was a loss. Subbed in round 1. He did not lose to Ronaldo Rodriguez, okay? He dropped Ronaldo Rodriguez badly in their fight and fumbled the finish. But Ronaldo just fucking wet blanketed him the entire time. I do not think he lost that fight. I think Ronaldo Rodriguez got gifted a decision. So besides that, he goes on. Everyone and their brother picked against him, actually, from what I remember anyway. They thought Louis GURULE is going to come out there with that wrestling and just out-grapple and beat him. What does he do? He KOs Louis GURULE, which I said he would. And that's one thing that I have to apply to every fight from Osbourne. He has, except I can't recall the Rafael Filho fight too much. He dropped Ronaldo Rodriguez. Like, Rodriguez literally got dropped so bad. I remember him being completely out cold and then being woken up by shots on the ground. Like, he was out cold. Louis Gurule dropped him badly, finished him on the ground. Steve Erceg dropped him badly, but Steve Erceg was able to, utilize that skill set he has of just kind of mixing up the striking and grappling. He is always hurting his opponents, and that is a big thing in this fight. His opponent in this one, I have no idea why his name's not there. My apologies. This is ALIBI IDRIS. He's from the last season of The Ultimate Fighter. I like to call him Alibi because that's how it's spelled. Alibi's 31 years old, 5'6", 68-inch reach. He's 10-1 as a pro, 0-1 in the UFC. Now, as I mentioned, Alibi is from The Ultimate Fighter. And you'd ask, how does he have a loss in the UFC? Well, he was in the finale for The Ultimate Fighter. He lost. He got subbed by the beast that Joseph Morales is. And I guess somehow the UFC just gives everybody the contract now if you're in The Ultimate Fighter. So Alibi's here. Obviously, he's got that close tie to Daniel Cormier, may have pulled some strings. Alibi's got 4 wins by KO, a 40% KO win rate, 1 win by submission, a 10% submission rate, and then 4 wins by decision, a 40% decision rate, giving him a 50% finishing rate overall. His only loss came by way of submission to Joseph Morales. I think Joseph Morales is a great fighter. He is going to have a solid second run here. He's already got another win already after that against Matt Schnell. So this fight, guys, it's interesting because a lot of people are going the way of Alibi, and I can see why, because Alibi does have that grappling acumen, right? He could utilize that grappling. We've seen Ode Osbourne struggle in some cases there. But guys, the way I see this fight going is Ode Osbourne's been a guy who, against the best of the best, he's even fought like the Manel Kops. He got KO'd by Manel Kopp. As I mentioned, fought Steve Erceg, who fought for the belt, gave Pantoja one of his hardest fights for the belt, because we can't really count Josh Van. That was a bit of a fluke. Josh Van won, but it's a fluke until Josh Van writes that and gets a rematch there. But like against a Louis Gurule, Ode Osbourne's able to shuck off those takedowns, land big shots, and drop him. The way I see this fight going, guys, I see Ode Osbourne having the stronger power and just landing a big shot that drops Alibi. And I can see him getting a win by way of knockout in this fight. And actually, I'm going with the crafty decision here because I think a lot of people are thinking that Alibi wins. There's definitely a chance that happens, and maybe I'm just way off here. But I see Ode Osbourne doing a similar performance to Louis Gurule, where maybe he doesn't have the best first round, but gets Alibi to work a lot in that those grappling exchanges. And then once round 2 comes on, he is much better, shucking off those takedowns, landing some big shots. I think he's going to land something that really hurts Alibi, and then he's going to be able to finish the fight by way of ground and pound. I see him getting to KO in round 2, so I'm going Ode Osbourne. This I may end up changing, just we'll have to see. But right now I'm leaning heavily Ode Osbourne KO in round 2. All right, guys, fight number 8, we got Chidi Bang Bang in Njokuani versus Carlos Leal. This is a 170-pound fight. Quite the welterweight showcase on this card, if you ask me. Chidi Njokuani is 37 years old, 6'3", 80-inch reach, 25-11 as a pro, 5-4 in the UFC. He's got 15 wins by knockout, 60% KO rate, 1 win by submission, a 4% submission rate, and a 9 wins by decision, 36% decision rate, giving Chidi Bang Bang a 64% finishing rate overall. He has 5 losses by knockout, a 45% KO loss rate, 4 losses by submission, a 36% submission loss rate, and then 2 losses by way of decision, an 18% decision loss rate. Now, last 4 fights for Chidi Bang Bang have looked pretty good. He got a split decision win over Reese McKee, not the greatest, but 3-1 in his last 4. Got a win over Jared Gooden, and then a KO win over Lisi Zaleski. I actually picked Chidi to get that done, so proud of that one. Did lose to Jake Matthews, which I kind of figured would happen as well. On the other side, we have Carlos Leal, a guy who's a bit of a marauder, right? 31 years old, 5'11", 74-inch reach. He's 22-7 as a pro, 1-2 in the UFC. Really, he is 2-1 in the UFC, if you ask me, because Renat Fakhretdinov did not fucking beat him, and I stand by that. Carlos has 11 wins by KO, a 50% KO rate, 2 wins by submission, a 9% submission rate, 7 wins by decision, a 32% decision rate, giving Carlos Leal a 59% finishing rate overall. Now, when we look at the losses here, 1 loss by way of KO, 14% of his losses. He got knocked out by Muslim Salikov, a very surprising loss there. I believe the only person to pick Muslim Salikov was Bedtime MMA. The Bedtime MMA has had some really crafty motherfucking unk picks, right? Before that, he gets a big win over Alex Morono, a KO in round 1, which, people might say you expect that, but then Alex Morono goes out there against Daniil Danchenko and doesn't get KO'd somehow. Before that, he debuted in the UFC where he beat Renat Fakhretdinov, but Somehow, Renat gets a unanimous decision win over him. Don't ask me where they fought. It was Abu Dhabi. Regardless, prior to that, gets a KO over Manuel Mena, but that was not in the UFC. So this fight, guys, is actually a lot harder than it looks because Carlos Leal, albeit, has shown to be and have those skills of a marauder. Very big strikes on the feet, very good, kind of just going back and forth, tit for tat with his opponents. Very good at checking kicks, very good at stuffing takedowns. Not that he has to worry about that against Chidi, but very good leg kicks, powerful leg kicks. He was really piecing up the leg of Renat Fakhretdinov and then landing big combinations on the feet as well. He has that killer mentality. So when he hurts someone, he is going gung-ho at them. He will walk his opponents down and just land big shots at will. And why it's a bit worrying, guys, is that he went out there against Muslim Salikhov. Maybe he just underestimated Salikhov's ability. You know, Salikhov's over 40 years old. He got caught by a clean right hook. Salikhov in the southpaw stance, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was a lead hook, but I think or a left hook. Regardless, I think he's in the southpaw stance, gets caught by that lead hook, drops him badly, falls on his fucking head. So that is worrying to me because it shows there is a potential that Chidi and Njokuani could land a big shot at range and drop Carlos Leal, maybe knock him out. So I think don't know what the odds are, but I'd bet that Chidi's probably a bigger underdog here. You're not going the complete wrong way if you go that way, okay? If you go down the path of Chidi and Njokuani, there's a chance he does land a big shot and KO Carlos Leal. He could even win by, getting Carlos Leal into that tie clinch that he likes to use, throw some knees up there, catch him and drop him. Where I see this going though, guys, I don't think Carlos Leal has a weak chin. I think he just had a moment in that fight against Muslim Salikhov where he was not expecting, similar to Michel Pereira, was not expecting to be lead hooked and dropped. And that's just what happened. Didn't see the punch coming, got dropped. I think he'll be about his wits here. Want to bounce back in that win category. And I see him just giving Chidi and Njokuani some problems on the feet because Chidi and Njokuani, 37 years old, we know he has had a lot of issues with cutting down to 170. And I don't blame him because he's kind of got a frame like mine. We're tall, thin guys, but like even me, like I naturally, I think the lowest weight that I will be, now I'm not dieting and things of that nature, but the lowest I'll weigh generally is like 180 pounds. And I kind of range from like 180 to 200. Like I'm in that range at all times, really. So it's not that easy to cut that type of weight at this age. And I think that that's going to compromise Chidi. And if Carlos Leal is able to survive those big shots that Chidi will land, I think he'll just be able to land with more volume and have a stronger pace throughout this fight and basically just win the fight by way of decision. I don't necessarily see him finishing Chidi and Joe. He could finish him with a KO, though. It is definitely possible. The way I see it going is Carlos Leal wins rounds by way of volume. Maybe he does drop Chidi, but I see him end up getting a win by way of unanimous decision, and that is my pick. All right, guys, fight number 9 on the card. We've got Zach Reese versus Michel Pereira, 185-pound bout. Zach Reese, 31 years old, 6'4", 77-inch reach. He's 10-2 as a pro, 4-2 in the UFC. 5 wins by way of knockout, a 50% KO rate. 3 wins by way of submission, a 30% submission rate, and 2 wins by way of decision, a 20% decision rate. Giving Zach Reese, the hometown hero from Austin, Texas, an 80% finishing rate overall. Now, Zach Reese has 2 losses in his career. Both of those have come by way of knockout, 100% KO loss rate. Not the best look going up against a Michel Pereira, right? In his last 4 fights, a little bit of a weird situation. He loses to Azamat Bekoyev by way of KO in round 1. It was some ground and pound. And then, the ref, I think, fucking slammed his head on the mat, if I remember correctly. Goes out there, gets a win over Dusko Tudorovic by way of decision. He has a no contest against Bunkgang, where he kicked Bunkgang in the nuts. And a big short notice submission victory over Jackson McVeigh, which, although it's kind of looked almost like a lower level fight, just based on how these guys were swinging. A lot of clinch exchanges there and landing, but Jackson McVeigh did a good job. He was getting Zach Reese to the body very early on, but Zach Reese did a great job at weathering the storm, and then he got Jackson McVeigh into his world and choked his ass out. So shout out to Zach Reese. Big win there. Now, Michel Pereira, his opponent, is 32 years old, 6'1" with a 73-inch reach. He is 31-14, 9-5 in the UFC. 11 wins by way of knockout, 35% KO rate. 8 wins by submission, a 26% submission rate. 11 wins by way of decision, a 35% decision rate. Giving Michel Pereira a 61% finishing rate overall. Really solid. Both these guys got solid finishing rates here. When we look at losses, Michel Pereira's got 3 losses by way of KO, a 21% KO loss rate. 1 loss by way of submission, a 7% submission loss rate, and then 8 losses by decision, a 57% decision loss rate. Now, last 4 for Mr. Pereira, not so hot, right? He is 1-3. He lost to Kyle Daukaus, Philly zone. Shout out to Kyle Daukaus. He went out there and from that crafty southpaw stance, he won that lead foot position, and he threw a fucking mean right hook that dropped Michel Pereira, and then he landed some big ground and pound. And then before that, he lost to Abus Magomedov. That's a fight where actually I picked Abus. A lot of people were going Michel. I picked Abus because I thought Abus would just be able to weather the storm and land those shots, mix in some takedowns. Anthony Hernandez just melted him in round 5. And then you had that 1 win over Ihor Potieria and sub in round 1. Now, guys, this is a tough one because Michel Pereira is a fighter that you really never know what you're going to get. He's like a fucking box of chocolates. Michel Pereira like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. He goes out there sometimes and, you know, makes fucking quick work. He spams a fucking body kick to Mikhail Olashashik, drops him, and then chokes his ass out, right? Like big wins like that. But then he loses a welterweight bout because he's doing a bunch of capoeira fucking backflips into the octagon back in 2019. And he fought a guy, I can't remember his name, but he was a very short Canadian guy. And this is one of the first Fight Night cards that I watched in full because I started watching at the end or in July of 2019. That's when I started watching full time. And yeah, I just remember being shocked. He was doing so much flips and stuff. And the dude he was fighting was like, I was just waiting. I was letting him do it because I was ready for him to get tired. What do you know? Michel Pereira blows his gas tank, which is something he tends to do early on in fights. And even sometimes does it before he gets out there. And then he loses the fight because of it. And that is the thing, guys. So in this matchup, he has the potential to go out there, catch Zach Reese, and put him out cold. Because Zach Reese has had those moments where his chin is in question, right? And Michel Pereira can blast. He's got some power in his hands, power in his feet. He is a very good striker. Where I see Zach Reese winning this fight is that I cannot trust Michel Pereira to not do fucking... I think someone said in his last fight, he was doing like bicep curls and shit before he walked out. And like getting so he looks good, right? He was looking at himself in the mirror and flexing. Goes out there and gets starched out. And I cannot trust that he's going to do what he needs to do to not be exhausted going into this fight and then not blow his gas tank off the rip. And I think Zach Reese, what I like from Zach Reese, although he has had those losses, like his other KO loss, he got slammed by Cody Brundage, right? It's not a good look. He lost in his hometown too. But Zach Reese has shown levels where he's kind of upped his game a bit. He's upped his striking game a bit. I really like how crafty he is with the elbows. He's very good at mixing in those elbows on the feet, very good angles. He even landed a big elbow on Azamat Bakoya before, you know, getting to the ground and then getting TKO'd on the ground. I just see Zach Reese, you know, hopefully weathering any storms that Michel Pereira kind of throws at him in the beginning parts of this fight. And from there, I see Zach Reese kind of picking up momentum. Maybe he loses the first round. Maybe he even gets dropped. I just see him having more tools as this fight goes on and a better gas tank as the fight goes on to put Michel Pereira on the back foot and maybe win on the feet for more strikes, mix in some takedowns, and maybe get Michel Pereira in some submissions as well. I see Zach Reese kind of thugging it out that way, getting a decision. It's going to be hard for him to finish Michel Pereira, but he does have a very high percentage of finishes in his career. And we did see Michel Pereira get dropped badly by Kyle Daukaus and KO'd. So I'm not saying Zach Reese can't KO Michel Pereira, but I think if there is a KO to happen, it's more than likely going to happen on the other end, him being the victim. But it could go that way. We should see. But I do think Zach Reese, just because he has a better mixed bag of skills, will get the job done by way of decision over Michel Pereira. All right, guys, fight number 10. This one is between the big boys, Sergey Spivak and Ante Delia. Hey there, Delia. Now, I wish I could say Sergey Spivak the way that Tom Aspinall talks, because whenever I fucking hear Sergey Spivak, I for some reason hear Tom Aspinall saying his name. Sergey Spivak is 30 years old, 6'3", 78-inch reach, 17-6 as a pro, 8-6 in the UFC. He's got 7 wins by KO, a 41% KO rate, 8 wins by way of submission, a 47% submission rate, 2 wins by way of decision, a 12% decision rate, giving Mr. Sergey Spivak, I think he's the polar bear, 88% finishing rate overall. 4 losses by way of knockout, 67% of his losses, and then 2 losses by way of decision, a 33% decision loss rate. Now, the last 4 fights for Mr. Spivak have not been solid, but he's gone up the best of the best at least that the heavyweight division can offer outside of Tom Aspinall. Now, I think Tom Aspinall did already beat him, but it was before this. He had a loss to Cyril Gane, KO in round 2. He had a win over Marcin Tybura, which is a big win. Got a nice submission there. Then he lost to Jailton Almeida by KO in round 1. That one is never going to age well, especially with where Jailton Almeida ended up being cut from the UFC. But he does have a decision loss to Waldo Cortez Acosta, where people thought Spivak won. I do just fundamentally disagree with that. But Spivak's opponent in this case is Ante Delija. Hey there, Delija. 35 years old, 6'3" with a 78-inch reach. These guys share the same height and reach. You have Ante, who's 26-7 as a pro, but only 1-1 in the UFC. So you have the younger guy with significantly more experience in the UFC. Ante's got 12 wins by way of knockout, a 46% KO rate, 7 wins by way of submission, a 27% submission rate, 7 wins by way of decision, a 27% decision rate, giving Ante Delija a 73% finishing rate overall. Ante's got 4 losses by way of knockout, 57% of his losses, 2 losses by way of submission, a 29% submission loss rate, and then 1 loss by way of decision, a 14% decision loss rate. Now, the last 4 fights for Ante Delija, 2-2, so not too bad. It's either he gets a KO or he gets KO'd, right? That's exactly what happens here. He lost by KO in round 1 to Valentin Moldavsky. He comes into UFC, or he gets a big win over Yorgan De Castro, a former UFC alum. One of his biggest knockouts being over Justin Tafa back in 2019. Knocks him out with a KO in round 1. Comes in UFC, knocks out Marcin Tybura, KO in round 1. So they both share a first-round finish over Marcin Tybura. But then he goes out there and he loses to Waldo Cortez Acosta by KO in round 1. Now, that one, there's a little bit of an asterisk there, right? It's somehow just this bad juju, right? Tom Aspinall gets brutally fucking finger banged in his eye sockets by Cyril. The next week, he goes out. He kind of shits on Cyril, says, I've never poked anyone in the eye in my entire career. So what do you know? Goes out there, and then he ends up eye-poking Waldo Cortez Acosta a couple days later. And after that eye poke, he blows his wad trying to finish the fight. Thinks he finished the fight, but he didn't. Has this huge adrenaline dump, and then he gets starched out by Waldo Cortez Acosta. Not saying that Acosta couldn't have done that later on in that fight, but the way that first round was going, guys, I think it was definitely favoring Delija prior to that sequence. And this fight was actually hard to break down, guys. I'm not super confident on my pick here. I did go with Ante Delija getting this one by a KO in round 2. Now, where I think this could go the opposite is just kind of based on the way the fight plays out. And what I mean by that is Spivak is a very strong and solid grappler for the heavyweight division. If he is able to get to the clinch and get some type of body lock, trip, getting Ante Delija to the ground, I see Spivak being very crafty in getting Delija to kind of try to scramble or panic on the ground to get back to his feet, make him wear that weight of Spivak, and just drain the gas tank, and then maybe get a submission when Delija is trying to scramble the feet. Or, like I said, weigh on him with that gas tank or weigh on his gas tank, and then potentially even land some ground and pound shots and make it a very troubling fight for Mr. Delija. Now, where I can see Ante Delija winning the fight convincingly is he needs to have solid takedown defense, not let Spivak get too close with those clinch controls or takedown attempts, and he needs to land those straight shots, those combinations that he lands on the feet, guys, getting Spivak to kind of back up. And if you've watched Spivak, he does like to retreat in straight lines. He does not do a good job at angling out or, getting outside of the danger. He kind of gets his back to the cage and just kind of goes backwards. And I see Ante Delija just swarming him. Like, this is something that Ante Delija did against Marcin Tybura. Just kind of had him on the back foot and hurt him early and had him kind of just swarmed him, had him backed up against the cage, swarmed him, and just beat the shit out of him. And I see Ante Delija having a potential path to victory there. And where I see it going, guys, I think round 1 is going to be probably a scrappy round for both guys. I see Ante Delija picking it up in round 2, landing a big shot, hurting Spivak. And Spivak is a guy who, although 30, still young, he's got a ton of damage. 14 UFC fights at this point. I see Delija just tagging him early, hurting him. And then in round 2, picking it back up, hurting him more, and then finding the finish. I see Spivak kind of just doing that thing where it's like he gets tagged, falls to the ground, and does his best to grapple his way out. But Delija staying smart, just landing some big ground and pound shots and finishing it in round 2. But not super confident. I actually was originally going to pick Sergey Spivak, And I wouldn't doubt anyone who's going that route because there's definitely that potential. But I think Ante Delija has that stronger potential to land some big KO shots and get it done by way of knockout in round 2. All right, guys, fight number 11 on the card. It's a featherweight bout, 145 pounds, between Dan 50K Ige and Melquizael Costa. Okay, this is going to be a fun fight. I think we're in for potential fireworks here if Melquizael goes out the way he did in his last one. Now, taking a look at these guys, you got Dan Ige, 34, 5'7" with a 71-inch reach. He is 19-10 as a pro, 11-9 in the UFC. 7 wins by way of KO, a 37% KO rate. 5 wins by way of submission, a 26% submission rate. 7 wins by way of decision, a 37% decision rate. Given Mr. Dan Ige 63% finishing rate overall, which is very solid in the featherweight division. Dan Ige has never been finished, guys. So when we look at his losses, he's got 10 losses all by way of decision. Now, some of these have been pretty close. Like, people didn't really necessarily think he really lost against Lerone Murphy. I'd have to go back and watch it, but I've seen people, and I remember there being some contention there. He did get pretty much dominated against Patricio Pitbull in his last outing. Dropped, actually, I think, or got hurt on the feet a few times, which was pretty surprising because Dan Ige was, I think, unanimously picked except for Mr. Bedtime. But outside of that, we got Melquizael Costa, his adversary, 29 years old, 5'10" with a 71-inch reach. He is 25-7 as a pro, which is nuts for being fucking 29, same age as me. 6-2 in the UFC. Melquizael's got 8 wins by KO and a 32% KO rate. 8 wins by submission, a 32% submission rate. And 9 wins by way of decision, a 36% decision rate, giving Mr. Melquizael Costa a 64% finishing rate. He just had to one-up Dan Ige. Now, looking at Melquizael's losses, he's got 2 by way of KO, a 29% KO loss rate, 2 by way of submission, a 29% submission loss rate, and then 3 by way of decision, a 43% decision loss rate. And when we look at his last 4 fights, he is on a nice little streak here. For whatever reason, his last fight, which I think was one of the biggest wins of his career, a head kick KO, Morgan Charrier, is not showing. But that was his last outing. We saw him get that head kick around the guard. I think Charrier got the hand up, but it was too much, and he got starched out cold by Melquizael Costa. Costa taking notes from Salkield. And some other big wins, though. He had that big win over Shailan Nurdanbeke, a submission. He got a submission over Andre Fili. He went out there and he bested Christian, or C-Rod, as we call him, Christian Rodriguez. And then he got a win over Julian Erosa, who is a bit of a crafty vet. He has gone out there and had crafty performances against some of these younger guys. This fight, guys, I think is all dependent on if Dan Ige is able to put some hands on the fucking face of Melquizael Costa early and often. Dan Ige is a guy who has very good power, that Hawaiian background and that Hawaiian power. If he's able to land and catch Melquizael Costa with something, he could change the course of the fight. He could have Costa second guessing, hesitant. He could even starch him out cold. I think the biggest thing for Dan Ige here is not trying to win a fight based on volume. I think Dan Ige can almost let Melquizael Costa win at range and win with the volume and just land the cleaner, heavier shots when it matters. Do something that pretty much a Justin Gaethje style fight, right? That Justin Gaethje just put on against Paddy Pimblett. That is what Dan Ige kind of needs to do in this matchup. Just land the cleaner, heavier shots, really test that chin of Melquizael Costa, and he needs to have a 100% solid takedown defense. Now, Melquizael Costa, guys, the reason I'm going with him by decision here, I just think that when you look at Dan Ige, he's the type of guy who can go out there and have a stellar performance against a really good talent, but he's also the type of guy to get out grappled, get out positioned, especially if the other fighter is mixing things up and switching up their attacks often, right? Lerone Murphy did a great job of this. I think if Melquizael Costa just utilizes his full skill set, which he tends to always do, he's got a pretty solid fight IQ. I think he'll be able to land shots at range. I think he'll be able to mix in those takedowns and basically win this fight. Even if Dan Ige is able to land some big shots, I could see Dan Ige like being crafty and winning a round 3 here. But then Melquizael Costa just tallying up those points with takedowns and shots from range, landing jab, landing the straight shots, maybe landing some head kicks from range. And I just see Melquizael Costa clinching 2 of the 3 rounds at the very least, getting a unanimous decision victory. That is why I'm going Melquizael Costa. But if you are a ride or die Dan Ige fan. I love Dan Ige, but I don't see him landing that KO shot here because I think Melky Zalcosa, although he has been KO'd, has a great ability to recover, especially he's able to get the grappling going. That is where I think it's going to be tricky for Dan Ige. So my pick is Melky Zalcosa, getting it done by way of decision. All right, guys, we are on to fight number 12 between Geoff, Hands of Steel Neal, and Uros Medic. Geoff Neal's 35 years old, 5'11" with a 75-inch reach. He is 16-7 as a pro, 8-5 in the UFC. Geoff Neal has 10 wins by way of knockout, a 63% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, 13% submission rate, 4 wins by way of decision, a 25% decision rate, giving Mr. Hands of Steel Neal a 75% finishing rate. Geoff Neal has 2 losses by way of KO and 2 losses by way of submission, 29% of his losses in each category there for both KO and submissions, and then 3 losses by decision, 43% of his losses. Taking a look at the last 4 fights for Geoff Neal. Now, it's a lot of red here, guys, but there's a few things that you have to consider. If you really look at the strength of schedule, Geoff Neal has had one of the hardest runs in welterweight. Stayed in the rankings, and as he mentioned recently, was struggling with some addiction stuff. Shout out to Geoff Neal, guys, because if you know or if you ever have been a victim or suffered from addiction yourself, I've been there with certain things like gambling. It is not fun. And if you have like family members who go through that, it is not a fun thing. It's a horrible thing to go through. So I definitely, my heart goes out to him there. And I'm happy to see that he's on the other side of that. But while he's struggling with that addiction, he's staying in the rankings and fighting the best guys. He's fighting the Shavkat Rakhmanovs before Shavkat, obviously was injured and has to sit out. Had a great scrap with Shavkat, hurt him a couple times. Goes on after losing to Shavkat to fight Ian Gary, or as we like to call him, Ian Ferry on this channel, who gets a lackluster split decision win over Geoff Neal, where Geoff Neal really was pushing the fight the entire time and Ian Gary was just skating around the outside as the little fairy he is. He goes out there against Rafael Dos Anjos, and what does he do? I think he lands a straight left that drops him pretty much immediately, and then Rafael Dos Anjos can barely stand. He ends up having a leg injury. I think he tore his ACL. And then he goes out there against Carlos Prates. He was doing okay against Carlos. Carlos lands that spinning elbow and puts him out. So just a tough run for Geoff Neal in the last 4, 1-3. But like I said, guys, these are the best guys that he could potentially go up against pretty much in this division. Now, his opponent, Uros Medic, 32 years old. He is 6'1" with a 71-inch reach. 12-3 as a pro. 6-3 in the UFC. Uros Medic has 10 wins by way of knockout, an 83% KO rate. 2 wins by way of submission, an 18% submission rate, giving Mr. Uros Medic a 100% finish rate. This is beautiful to see at welterweight, guys. The Medic is a great fighter. He's only got a few losses, 3 losses. 1 of those came by way of knockout, 33% of his losses. And then 2 of those came by way of submission, 67% of his losses. His last 4 fights seem to have a lot more success, but take that for what you will. The list of opponents are a much lower caliber and less danger. He got a KO over a Tim Means, who was at the end of his rope there. Tim Means was a scrappy guy, but Tim Means, when he fought Uros Medic, was pretty much at the end of his career in the UFC. He goes out there, he gets KO'd by Punahele Soriano after Soriano dropped from middleweight to welterweight. Soriano always had power at middleweight, so that's not the worst loss. But he goes out there against Gilbert Urbina, and I picked him to win in that fight, but he gets dropped early by Gilbert Urbina, which is scary to think about. But what does he do? He ends up KOing Gilbert Urbina pretty badly, and then he goes on to get a big KO win over Muslim Salikov, right? And this is why MMA is crazy, because the same Muslim Salikov somehow KO'd Carlos Leal in 1 punch. Carlos Leal looked like he was going to be a marauder in this division. So this is going to be a fun fight, guys. The way I see this fight going is these two are scrappers. They're going to scrap it out on the feet. Unlikely to see any type of takedowns here. I think that Geoff Neal, guys, is one of the best southpaw boxers in the welterweight division. He's very good with his ability to walk guys down in that southpaw stance and just land on them with fast hand speed, strong punches. He just hurts guys on the feet. I mean, we saw him put on an absolute clinic against Bilal Muhammad. Now, that was 6 or 7 years ago, but 6 or 7, my bad. Anyways, it literally was 7 years ago, so fuck off. But as I say that, Geoff Neal is so good at walking his opponents down and just landing with that hand speed that he has. Uros Medic, though, is a very solid boxer himself. He is a guy who's going to come out and he's going to look for that fast start and look to land those shots on Geoff Neal. Really, the way I see this fight going is whoever's able to land the cleaner shots first could potentially close the show. Uros is not a guy that you can necessarily sleep on in this fight. He could potentially catch Geoff Neal, especially since we saw Geoff Neal get KO'd pretty brutally in his last outing, and he's 35. There is a chance that Uros Medic goes out there and knocks Geoff Neal out. But in my opinion, guys, the way I see this going is that these two kind of scrapping back and forth on the feet. I see both of them having some success. I see both of them hurting each other, actually. Where I think this ends up going, though, is, as you can see, Uros Medic is not a guy who tends to get out of the first round very often. I see Geoff Neal being crafty enough and very tricky as a southpaw, boxing back and forth here with Uros Medic, which I think as we get into the later rounds is going to start to show those defensive gaps, right? He's going to get tired. He's going to drop his hands more. And Geoff Neal is going to land a sharp, probably right hook counter, maybe a right hook counter with a straight left down the middle. And I see him dropping Uros Medic and then landing some ground and pound and getting a KO. That is the way I look at this fight. I think it ends in round 2 by way of knockout. Geoff, hands of steel. Neal, the hometown hero, gets his hand raised. That is who I'm picking for this fight. All right, guys. We have made it to the main event of the evening. This is going to be fight number 13 for UFC Fight Night Houston. And in the main event, it's a middleweight bout, 185 pounds between Sean Strickland and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Guys, this fight was very hard to truly make a decision on, in my opinion. I know a lot of people out there are expecting Fluffy Hernandez to just go out there and blitz through Strickland. And there is a case where Anthony Hernandez somehow, some way, blitzes through Sean Strickland. Now, in my opinion, although Anthony Hernandez is on an 8-fight win streak, I believe, we do have to dissect his resume just a little bit. Not that he hasn't fought the best guys. Like, he has fought some really solid talent. But when you look at the guys that Sean Strickland's been in there with, especially as of recent, obviously you had, before he got the title shot against Israel Adesanya, he went in on short notice and beat Imavov. Imavov, who ended up knocking out Adesanya last year, and who is likely now to be the one fighting for the title against Chimaev. But then he also goes out there, in my opinion, he beat Dricus du Plessis in his first title defense. Now, I know a lot of people went the other way there, but I feel Sean Strickland, as the champ in that fight, damage-wise, did more than Dricus. Now, you can go back and look at the pictures, but it took Dricus like a month or 2 months for his face to go down from the swelling that Sean put on him. Now, Sean did get cut open from a headbutt. Not a headbutt, but clash of heads. But in my opinion, guys, I think that Sean won that fight. He goes on, he fights Paulo Costa, which, yeah, I don't know how much we can rate that. But then he goes on and loses to Dricus, so not the greatest look for Sean, but he has had a very strong strength of schedule. He's also had a lot more 5-round fights. Now, Anthony Hernandez has had a couple 5-round fights that just didn't go to 5 rounds because he was able to finish them in the UFC. But this fight is really going to be who can come out there with the better game plan and stick to that game plan and ultimately get it done. But let's dive into the stats. Sorry, I just had to give you guys a little preamble for this one because this one is the main event, and I think it is a big fight for the middleweight division. Could be who is actually going up to be next against Chimaev if he decides to even defend his belt twice. We shall see. Taking a look at their stats, you got Sean Strickland, who's 34 years old. He's 6'1" with a 76-inch reach. Sean is 29-7 as a pro. He's 16-7 in the UFC alone. He's got 11 wins by knockout, 38% KO rate, 4 wins by submission, a 14% submission rate, 14 wins by decision, a 48% decision rate, giving Mr. Strickland a 52% finishing rate overall. Not the highest, but not the lowest. Sean's losses, he's had quite a few, but all of them essentially, except for 2. He has 2 losses by way of KO, which is 29% of his losses. And he has the rest of them by decision, which is the other 71% of his losses. And as I mentioned in my little preamble for this, he goes out there in a rematch against Dricus. Some people say he didn't deserve it. I mean, he did win one against Paulo Costa. The middleweight division has kind of been in a weird spot to begin with. And, you know, obviously you had Nasruddin Imavov actually fight Adesanya, I think the week before Sean was to get his rematch against Dricus. So not the most egregious in my opinion, but he loses to Dricus. He gets a win before that over Paulo Costa. And then before that, he had the split decision loss to Dricus, which I feel he won. And prior to that, he got the unanimous domination victory over Israel Adesanya. I don't think anyone's in disagreement that he dominated that fight. His adversary, Fluffy Anthony Hernandez. He is 32 years old, 6 feet tall, with a 75-inch reach. So Fluffy's literally just 1 inch smaller with 1 inch less reach than Mr. Strickland. He's 15-2 as a pro, and he is 9-2 in the UFC. Fluffy has 3 wins by way of knockout, a 20% KO rate, 9 wins by way of submission, a 60% submission rate, 3 wins by way of decision, a 20% decision rate, giving Mr. Fluffy Hernandez an 80% finishing rate. That is what we love to see, guys. Us fight feeders are fans of the finishers. Now, taking a look at Fluffy's losses, only 2 losses in his professional career. He's got a 50% KO loss rate because he lost once by way of KO, and he lost another time by way of submission, which is the other 50% of his losses. Now, his last 4 fights, we're all in green here, baby. He's got an 8-fight win streak, as I mentioned. He got a big win over Roman Kopylov, subbed him in round 2, went on to then get a big win over Michel Pereira in round 5. So he did go to a round 5 there, but he was able to finish that one by way of KO. Michel Pereira just got melted in that round. He goes on to fight Brendan Allen, which he gets another win, but that was by way of decision. And then he goes on to fight Roman Dolidze, where he, as I mentioned, grabbed him like his younger brother, ran across the octagon with him in a rear naked choke, and got a sub in round number 4. So Anthony Fluffy Hernandez has been on quite the streak here, guys. Now, when I break this fight down, there's just, it's too hard to just look at Fluffy Hernandez as like the grappler versus striker, right? And the reason why is because Fluffy Hernandez, I think people forget that he has a very well-rounded and mixed bag of skills when it comes to his kickboxing arsenal. He's a very good kickboxer. He's actually said in interviews that he was a kickboxer first, and the grappling kind of came later. I think he even said he kind of learned how to grapple because if he didn't, he would just get smoked by his teammates in training. So he kind of learned how to grapple because of that. So he's got a weird ability to just grapple his ass off, even though it wasn't his main thing that he started with. What I'm going to break down for you guys outside of these stats, and I'm going to get to why I'm leaning Anthony Hernandez, is we're going to take a look at the win scenarios for each fighter, right? So you have Strickland, who has really 3 ways, and I think he has to kind of put all of these together potentially, but there's really 3 ways for him to somehow get the win here over Fluffy Hernandez. The first way I would say is just the typical Strickland striking clinic of stuff the takedowns and jab his ass off, jab and teep his ass off, right? So if he's able to go out there and do what Strickland does, stuff these takedowns from Fluffy Hernandez, stay on the outside, and basically just dictate the pace from range with the jab and the teep kick, keeping Fluffy Hernandez kind of at bay, if you will. I think Strickland has a way of winning this fight by, defending those takedowns for 3 to 4 rounds. I think he can maybe lose 1 to 2 rounds, of course, to Fluffy. Maybe let those takedowns happen if he's not able to stop them. But he needs to have 3 to 4 rounds of just him stuffing takedowns each time, landing his jab at will, and just going out there with more volume. Now, against Dricus in the rematch, we didn't see that from Sean. We saw a different Sean. Dricus did a great job at just timing those jabs, timing those striking exchanges. And Strickland, guys, is a very tricky guy on the feet. People don't give him enough credit for this, but there's a reason he was able to go out there, unanimously defeat Israel Adesanya, one of the best strikers we've ever seen. It's due to the way that he's able to not only put a pace on people, but more so just his rhythm. And I think Strickland, because he only really spars, as he said, he doesn't do the strength stuff. He doesn't do all the other, bells and whistles. He kind of just spars, and that's his training. He is so keen on when people are throwing strikes at him, a very good head movement, very good ability to kind of just know the flow of a fight. I would say the other option that Strickland has is just timing the entries well. So outside of just having a potential, jab and teep clinic, he has this other aspect where if he can time the entries from Hernandez and punish him when he enters, he could potentially kind of pair that first way of winning with this one by timing those entries and landing a hard shot on Hernandez as he tries to enter when it be a takedown or striking. If he can get Hernandez hesitating on the feet or even hesitating in those entries, then he has a much better opportunity of, getting a win by way of decision. Then there's also this last way, which I don't think is necessarily primed to happen here, but he could get a late TKO, right? Because we've seen Strickland have a very good gas tank. everyone and their brothers talking about Fluffy Hernandez and his ability with his gas tank. But if Strickland is kind of hitting these two notes, right? If he's punishing those entries, he's landing the jabs, he's landing the teeps, which if you don't know this, Hernandez, one of the KOs that really, the only KO he suffered in his career was to Kevin Holland, and it was a straight shot to the body that dropped him. So not saying that Strickland has that type of fast twitch power, but I think over the course of a 5-round fight, if Strickland's digging those toes deep in the guts of Hernandez, he has a chance to really wilt at that, or make him wilt as he continues to pepper those things from range. I think that he could just have that accumulation of damage, whether it be from the jab and the teep, and get that swelling going, and perhaps just land a big shot that could be opened up due to Fluffy kind of being frustrated and maybe the gas tank not being there at the end of the fight, maybe like a late round 4, round 5 TKO. Now, I don't really see that happening, but it is something you have to consider as a fan, right? Because MMA, we just fucking never know. Now, when we look at Fluffy Hernandez, on the other hand, there's a lot more ways, in my opinion, that Fluffy has to secure rounds, right? And it's mainly because he is just a more versatile fighter. Strickland is not a guy who's going to shoot takedowns. He's never going to shoot takedowns, at least from what we've seen. He's kind of really just going to continue to do the same thing from range, jab and teep. And you know, when Strickland does find openings or he hurts somebody, he can tend to then, you know, start to lay it on more, but usually just kind of a 1-2 type of guy. I think one way Hernandez can win this fight is using a fence first strategy. What I mean by that, he needs to constantly be pressuring Strickland, have Strickland on the back foot, getting him to the cage, getting his back to the cage or getting him close to the cage. And I think once he has Strickland to the cage, he'll be able to set up more of those clinch exchanges that we know he's very good with. And then he'll also be able to set up, you know, getting to those takedowns, getting to the hips, riding the hips from the back, getting him down to the ground. And even if Strickland's able to stuff those takedowns, you're going to have a lot more mat returns, especially if he's got Strickland's back to the cage, which is just going to not only accumulate points for Hernandez, it's also going to eat at the gas tank of Sean Strickland. I think another way Fluffy can really get to Strickland in this fight is just charging Strickland with a nice scramble tax. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've watched Sean Strickland, he's usually very good at defending that first layer of takedowns. But when it comes to the chain wrestling, you know, a wrestler who's very good about getting to the hips, like Anthony Hernandez, that is where Strickland, I think, is going to struggle a bit more, especially because he might be able to stuff that initial layer with that solid brick wall first layer takedown defense he has. But it's those other takedowns that come from the chain wrestling where you start to see Strickland wilt a bit more in his ability to stop the takedown, but also burns a bit more energy trying to get the wizard, trying to climb his way back to his feet as fast as he can. That is where I think he's going to, if he's able to charge that tax on Strickland throughout this fight, we're going to see Strickland, although has this legendary gas tank, we're going to see that deplete a lot faster, I think. And then I think where we land with the third approach or key to victory here for Fluffy Hernandez is, you know, kind of utilizing 1 and 2, as I mentioned. The final element here is getting a late submission, throwing up those submission attempts after 15 to 20 minutes of nonstop scrambling, nonstop takedown defense from Strickland. I think Hernandez needs to find those openings where he can latch up a submission, even if it's just to have Sean thinking about that. I think that is another area where he's going to not only have more dominant positioning, but also win in those exchanges. Now, if he can get the submission, great. You know, Sean is not a guy, as you guys can tell, he doesn't get subbed. He never has been. So it's not that Hernandez can't do that, guys. We've seen a lot of firsts, all right? We've seen Carlos Prates go out there, knock out Geoff Neal, first KO of Geoff Neal's career in the UFC. He goes out there and he starches out, Leon Edwards, right? Never been KO'd in the UFC. So you have these things that happen in UFC. So I'm not saying Hernandez can't do it. I just think that when I look at both of these guys, their keys to victory, I have to just be very blunt and honest that Sean Strickland, although I'm a fan, love Sean Strickland. People have told me that I somewhat look like Sean Strickland when I got my head shaved because, you know, we're white and above 6 feet tall and have shaved heads. So, and I think Sean's kind of like me in the sense that he can grow hair. He just doesn't. Like, that's how I am. Regardless, where I think this fight goes, guys, I think that Anthony Hernandez, as I mentioned in all of these different areas, if you really look at those different paths to victory that I talked about, the paths to victory for Hernandez are actually realistic. The paths to victory for Strickland, I don't think we can actually fully count on, right? We can't fully count that he'll be able to punish entries very well. He hasn't always been able to do that. He also hasn't gotten a TKO over an opponent in a very long time. So it's just less realistic, in my opinion, that Sean is able to kind of achieve those areas. Could it happen? Absolutely. But in my opinion, Anthony Hernandez is going to win this fight by way of decision because of all the tools he possesses. And I think he definitely always sticks to that original game plan and doesn't seem to stray too much from that. And I think that's where we're going to see Fluffy Hernandez shine. Now, Fluffy Hernandez could go out there and put on a clinic with his kickboxing and maybe even beat him by strikes. That's another opportunity, but I don't see him honing in on just that. I think he's going to utilize the skill set he's used in all of these wins that he's been getting. So I got Fluffy Hernandez. I don't think he'll finish it, but I think he gets it done by way of decision. I hope you guys enjoyed my breakdown for UFC Fight Night that's happening in Houston on February 21st. Make sure to subscribe to Fite Feed, give this video a like, hype it up. I will see you all in the next one.